I call this meeting to order, the 42nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. Orders of the day pursuant to Standing Order 1082, continuing our study of tax incentives for charitable donations. We have 6 organizations with us here today. First of all, Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Canada. We have the Canadian Council of Christian Charities. We have Cardis, the Community Foundations of Canada, the David Suzuki Foundation, and the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. I understand some of you are new to a committee format, so in terms of what will happen, each of you will have 5 minutes for an opening presentation. If you watch me as a chair, I'll give you a minute to indicate when you have a minute left, and then we'll have questions from members in 5-minute rounds. So we'll begin with Mr. McDonald for your 5-minute presentation.
Great, thank you. First of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here representing Big Brothers Big Sisters of Canada. Before discussing the 2 specific measures we're supporting, I wanted to provide a highlight reel of information so that it kind of contextualizes our thoughts. Big Brothers Big Sisters is a federated organization of 123 local agencies providing on-the-ground mentoring services to children and families.
Mr. McDonald, just slow down just a touch. If
Well, I'm going to give the translators
Yeah,
okay.
The translators are working very fast.
///. So we're providing these services in all provinces in one territory. The organization's gone from serving about 9,500 kids in 1995 to a record high of over 33,400 in 2010. A particular note is the fact that this year we're in our 99th year of service. So next year we'll be celebrating 100 years of our service to Canadians. So from the highlight reel, Big Brothers Big Sisters in our national budget, almost half of our dollars come from the corporate community and individuals. Our 2012 national budget calls for $0 to come from the federal government, so we're really quite an independent bunch. Our centennial plans will be funded primarily from the private sector, and in fact, we've already signed a couple of corporate deals, multi-year agreements to support our 100th anniversary. Locally, our two main sources of revenue come from special events, our Signature Bowl for Kids' Sake event, which I know many of you have participated in, and support from local United Ways. And we're an organization that believes strongly in safety and accountability. We have a set of national service delivery standards and organizational management standards that we accredit to ensure that our member agencies are operating at the highest quality. As we continue to work to be a dynamic, relevant organization, we're always looking to ask how we can be better. And having this opening and questioning mindset allows us to make changes. And I just want to highlight a couple of those. We continually ask whether we can provide our services in a long-term, sustainable manner. Sometimes the answer is that changes in our model are necessary. And in fact, several committee members here come from communities where significant change has resulted in stronger, newer services. So Mr. Rajat will have seen the recent merger of Big Brothers Big Sisters and Boys and Girls Clubs in Edmonton. Mr. Bryson will have noted, when he was here a second ago, he would have noted the, oh, there he is, the renewal of our Annapolis Valley agency. And Mr. Hoback will have seen that the changes in Prince Albert, where we've gone from an independent standalone organization to a satellite operation receiving back-end admin support from Saskatoon. Our centennial provides a wonderful forum for us to talk about where we aspire to go. And in order to continue to grow our services, we know that we need to do more to effectively engage individual Canadians as mission-based donors. So today we're supporting two ideas, the creation of a stretch tax credit and an elimination of the capital gains tax on donations of real estate and private company shares to nonprofits and charities. As part of our efforts to develop ongoing sources of revenue, Big Brothers Big Sisters has launched an alumni program. Currently, there's over 17,000 individuals that have registered, and it's our goal to convert many of those into individual financial contributors. Strategically, the stretch tax credit is in direct alignment with our efforts, as many of these individuals are already giving to other organizations, and we intend to have them add Big Brothers Big Sisters to their roster of supported organizations. Having a real tax incentive to make new financial contributions will encourage these individuals of any income level to expand their charitable giving efforts. And part of our long-term strategy is to work more effectively with individuals of higher net worth, being able to offer a wider portfolio of benefits to attract the contributions of real estate and private company shares, complete with the suggestions for prevention, evaluation, abuse as suggested by Donald Johnson in his submission to this committee in September 2011 would be of great value. And the final, I just want to conclude with some thoughts around the transformative nature of our mentoring programs. As part of our efforts to clearly demonstrate impact, we've been partners in a 5-year longitudinal study following 980 children and almost 500 mentor volunteers in our Big Brothers and Big Sisters programs. And I'm pleased to be able to share some findings on the baseline 6-month, 12-month, and 18-month and 24-month surveys. When compared with young people who have never been matched, youth who have spent at least 1 year with a mentor are 43% less likely to have conduct problems, 48% less likely to have behavioral problems in school, 34% less likely to be victimized by their peers. It speaks to the bullying issue. They're 2 times more likely to have high levels of school bonding and commitment, and they're almost 2.5 times more likely to participate in extracurricular activities in school, and 2 times more likely to have higher academic achievement. It's great that this committee is talking about ways that Canadians can support organizations like ours who are in communities across this country spending thousands of hours working with Canadian children, and our mentor volunteers are making a transformative difference in their lives. So I thank you for this opportunity to speak to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Canadian Council of Christian Charities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Canadian Council of Christian Charities, which I'll refer to hereafter as 4Cs, is a member-based association with over 3,200 faith-based charities across the country. We maintain two key functions. First, we provide practical expert resources for the support and leadership functions of these charities. The second key function is our charity certification program. Since 1983, 4Cs has conferred a seal of accountability on charities who have met our standards. 4Cs is pleased with the willingness of this committee to review tax incentives for charitable donations. We have canvassed our members to determine what their concerns and hopes are for this initiative. And so that's what I'm doing here today. We'll present some of those concerns. Members of 4Cs bring not only an altruistic impetus for doing good, but a deep spiritual motivation to be, as it were, our brother's keeper. Our members tell us that the younger generation do not give as their parents once gave. When they do give, it is often with conditions that it be spent on specific programs. And we see a movement away from a large donor base giving small amounts and to a smaller and aging donor base giving larger amounts. Churches express the desire to be involved in social enterprise endeavors, but are concerned for their charitable status with Canada Revenue Agency, CRA. Government policy, of course, will need to become more flexible for such creativity to take wing and bring solutions. When it comes to accountability, our members operate in what I would call a culture of frugality. They know what it is to work within a limited budget. That culture of frugality can provide confidence that incentives to encourage further giving will not be taken for granted. Nevertheless, we recognize the fraudulent soul of man, as it were, and the need for accountability. Audits and other tests of integrity remain a necessity, and the Canadian public has every right to insist on the highest standards. So then we bring 6 recommendations to the Standing Committee. First, we recommend that the current tax treatment for donations of publicly listed charities be extended to donations of real estate. Second, we recommend that the charitable tax credit for individuals increase from 29% to 42% on all charitable donations. We're of the view that this measure would work to increase support from core existing donors. It is a straightforward adjustment that will stimulate and foster a healthy civic core of generosity. Our third recommendation has to deal with publicly listed securities. That donations of publicly listed securities eligible for capital gains exemption should be given a charitable tax credit of 42% on the adjusted cost base. And also, of course, and continue with the existing charitable tax credit of 29% on the capital gain. Our fourth recommendation came up in our request of our membership, in us informing them that we're going to be here before this committee. And some of them noted that there was a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape when it came to the charities the churches being involved in overseas work. And one of the ideas that has come out of our initial discussions with our membership is to look at the whole issue of the need for agency or joint ministry agreements for any amount that goes overseas. And that they feel is problematic because it increases bureaucratic red tape and for the need of greater efficiency. And so we're recommending that the committee consider looking at some kind of a threshold whereby charities would be able to be involved in overseas work with a limited amount of paperwork. We're suggesting 1% of the annual revenue of the charity. The other recommendations we have is to extend the 5-year carry-forward rule to 7 years or more. Finally, our final recommendation is that we are supportive of the further dialogue between the government and the charitable sector about charity involvement in for-profit social enterprise. And we recognize that this is complex, given the sector's diversity and multiplicity of options, but we would certainly be supportive of the idea of more careful study about what can and cannot be achieved through this government policy being reviewed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll now hear from Cardis, please.
The great issue of our day is whether we can order our world with flourishing institutions apart from governments and the markets. This is the very key question behind the very taxing issue facing this committee. The future of charitable giving and the vibrancy of the charitable sector will be influenced more by social and cultural conditions than by the limited tools of government. Tax incentives are only one such tool, but they are a powerful tool, and we must use them in the best way that we can. The charitable tax credit is one of the most successful tax credits ever implemented. It is a $2 billion investment that may be our most effective lever to animate more than 80,000 charities across Canada. It is less than 1% of the whole federal budget, yet it's treated like the oil of Elijah that, as the ancient text suggests, never runs out. The numbers speak for themselves. In 2005, government expenditures for the charitable tax credit was $2.26 billion. In 2011, it was less than $2.26 billion. Over that same period of time, Canada's population increased by 2 million, and the incomes of Canadians increased. Additionally, Canada's demographic bubble suggests giving would be at a dramatic high. Indeed, in 2008, the government estimated a charitable tax expenditure for 2010 of slightly less than $3 billion. Clearly, it expected Canadians to give more. We can all see the arithmetic on the wall. Unless Canadians have a greater motivation to give, something in the charitable sector is going to give. So here's my appeal to you. When you have the oil of Elijah, and it will cost them less than $1 billion to keep it flowing, prudence demands the tax expenditure happens. The way to do this is to raise the charitable tax credit, ideally from 29 to 42. It's simple, it's bold, it's straightforward. The public understands it. I have the privilege of sitting on Minister Diane Finley's Advisory Council for Social Partnerships. We advise the Minister on social enterprise initiatives to leverage the work of government and others. If we discovered a $3 billion idea that could act as a powerful fuel cell for every charity across the country, we would be leaping for joy right over to Minister Flaherty's office with every confidence that it would be right up there in the highlights of the upcoming budget. What I'm really talking about is a strategy to shore up the great work of Canada's Civic Corps, a small but amazing part of our society. What I'm asking you to do is to tell the participants in the Civic Corps that government is behind them and will help them do even more. In the meantime, the deep social and cultural questions that really motivate our care and love for our neighbor must become the next great debate in our country. If it doesn't happen, tax incentives won't help. There are many great ideas out there to complement Cardis's strategy. There are also some that unfortunately do not measure up. I respectfully suggest that the stretch credit is such. As it stands, it is not a policy that is material to the whole charitable sector. It will generate limited dollars. It's too experimental. It is biased to the spontaneous giver rather than to the plan giver. Getting your young male Bay Street lawyer to donate more in 1 year than he spends at the pub with his buddies on Friday night is a cultural task, not a tax strategy. Attracting new donors through tax incentives is a stab-in-the-dark strategy. Everyone who raises money, and that's all of you around the table, know that the best way to receive a donation is to ask from someone who already donates. And, except perhaps for Canada's charitable giving leaders that live in Abbotsford, BC, Canadians already have much more room to give. By contrast to the stretch credit idea, Don Johnson's plan for the removal of capital gains of the gifting of real property is a great idea. It's easy to do. Extending to privately held shares needs a lot more work. Other drawback, the giving of capital already receives more benefit from giving of income, a disincentive to those who have no appreciated capital to give. Maybe it's time to send an encouraging message to the middle class that their charitable works are worthy of acceptance. Cardis has done extensive research on the nature of generosity, on the health of the Civic Corps, and on the importance of institutions mediating between government and the market. It is our considered opinion increasing the charitable tax credit is the best idea of the ideas on the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now go to Mr. Byrd, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be back here. I'm just going to talk briefly on the thought process we've gone through to bring you some ideas. And I guess the jumping off point for us around the Community Foundation Network, I mean, each of you will know of your local community foundation, whether you're on Salt Spring Island or Burlington or Edmonton or where have you. There's 180 of them. And so as we thought about this, one of the interesting outcomes of that was the recognition that actually it's not about us. The conversations that you're having, the debate you're having around Mr. Braid's motion and the background to this is it's not so much about the institutions, some of whom are here and you're hearing from others. It's about the public policy goal that you're trying to achieve. It's about the Canadians that you're trying to connect to. And I think that question has been well framed around how would we stimulate through tax incentives activity behavior by Canadians. And I know some of you from previous work, when I was working in the sport field, where we looked at the children's fitness tax credit, which similarly was about stimulating a kind of behavior, and I think that's instructive to your discussions. So if it's not about us per se, if it's not about and it is about the public policy goal, how might we sort of take advisement from what we know of our past? And in Mrs. Glover's riding in Winnipeg, there's a very successful organization that started because a gentleman about 90 years ago made a very generous gift, $100,000. 90 years ago, this is a lot of money. William Alloway, and he was the founder of the Winnipeg Foundation. And for the most part, if you read the story of the Winnipeg Foundation, you learn about Mr. Alloway. We know about much of this, and in fact, this committee and previous iterations and Parliament itself, and in turn the government, have put in place incentives to encourage that kind of a gift built off of the asset, built off of the back of publicly listed securities. But 90 years ago, this was a very generous gift. The story that's less well known is the second gift. And this was a gift of 3 $5 gold coins by a widow. 3 $5 gold coins, $15 for the widow. The widow's mite this was. This was, again, a significant gift for her. But to Michael's point of view, this was a civic gift. This wasn't a gift of wealth. This was about a civic expression by someone of very limited means, but who understood that everyone had a place to give. And the unfortunate circumstance is that that founding story of Winnipeg has been one of decline in a sense ever since. We have a declining circumstance in Canada, declining optimism in our communities amongst charities and nonprofits for their ability to deliver services, a declining participation. You know now, after a few days of doing this, the numbers, I don't think I need to repeat them. You know there's declining capacity to fulfill the obligations that citizens have to one another. And that decline is happening at the same time that you're faced with the pressures of balancing budgets and the importance not just that insists upon the federal government, but also provincial governments and municipal governments. So in a time of decline, what kind of response will Canada have? That's the place that we've landed. And then we stood back and we said, in that circumstance, what does it call upon Canada to bring forward? What shall we collectively, how shall we collectively respond? And given the many fair proposals that are on the table around the further distribution of assets from private shares, or increasing the charitable credit, or the stretch tax credit, and there's others, these are all fair and valuable contributions to the debate. That sort of what should we do now? And our answer on that is, in fact, is the stretch credit. And the reason is that there's 24 million tax filers. There's 24 million Canadians, and there's some 5 million or thereabouts that are currently participating in the benefits that come from the charitable credit. And we need to close that gap. Any kind of economic action plan that ought to be taken up should invite constituents right across the country in each community to participate and make a contribution. And in fact, this has been recognized by the opposition benches in their support to the Finance Committee submission. And given that the committee will take its leave soon to study other matters, I would encourage the government side of the House, the government side of the committee, in their conversations with the Minister of Finance, to recommend the adoption of the stretch in this year's budget. It's the right time for this measure to be put forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll hear from Mr. Robinson now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to present to this committee. And I should start, if I could, my wife, who is at home alone in Vancouver, asked me to wish all of the members a happy Valentine's Day. My name is Peter Robinson, and I have been the CEO of the David Suzuki Foundation for the past 4 years. DSF is a charitable environmental organization whose purpose is to undertake scientific research and communications. I'd like to preface my comments today by noting that there is almost as much discussion about charitable organizations occurring at 2 other federal panels at the moment as there is here, and that would be the House Standing Committee on Natural Resources and the Joint Review Panel on the proposal to build the Northern Gateway Pipeline. And I say this because I believe that it shows that there is a role that the government can play to do a better job of educating Canadians about what are the eligible activities that charities can engage in, and more clearly recognize that charities play an integral role in democratic discussion in this country through the provision of accurate and timely information. Now, our written brief fully supports the encouragement of charitable giving in this country by increasing the federal charitable tax credit and extending capital gains exemptions to private company shares in real estate. So, I'm going to focus instead on some comments that I've already read in the transcripts on transparency and reporting, international funding, and the issue of advocacy. And I'll begin with the issue of transparency and reporting, because I believe that the public should be able to know more about the organizations they are intending to support. And this would include more information on gifts from foundations, both domestic and foreign. Much of this information is already posted on CRA filings, which points out perhaps that the problem is not with the information, but perhaps with how it is accessed and interpreted. And frankly, there should be even greater concerns about the lack of transparency regarding private sector funding of corporate lobbying, which is completely invisible to the Canadian public now. Switching to the topic of international funding, there has been considerable discussion lately about U.S. foundations funding Canadian charities. Much of it has been negative. And some of these recent discussions have been about Canadian environmental organizations. But the bulk of giving from U.S. foundations, 75%, is for education, health care, and social services, funding which is an important contribution to Canadian democratic society. DSF itself receives on average 93% of our revenue from Canadians, 6% from the U.S., and 1% from other countries. And for the last 3 years, this international funding has been almost exclusively for projects related to scientific research on harvesting seafood and strengthening marine planning systems on the West Coast. And this work demonstrates how environmental issues really know no boundaries. So if the committee is concerned about encouraging charitable giving, then enabling contributions from outside of Canada is actually quite critical. Restricting international donations could lead to a reduction in the amounts available to Canadian charities, and this might undo many of the enhancements proposed through tax credits and capital gains exemptions. Which leads to my final point about the role of charities and advocacy. I noted earlier our scientific research on seafood issues. This type of work often leads to actions directed at strengthening government policy to protect the environment. CRA policies acknowledge that charities are well placed, and this is a quote, to study, assess, and comment on government policies, and that charities may advance their purposes by taking part in political activities. Such activities must, of course, be nonpartisan, and substantially all, 90% of the resources of an organization must be devoted to the charitable actions. When DSF calculates these political activities, which it has to do on an annual basis, we include the number of hours that staff spend on these actions as well as all other direct costs, and they have always been less than 10% of our total operating costs. I'd like to conclude my comments today by asking that the committee keep in mind that governments need information from charitable organizations in order to formulate policies that accurately reflect the diverse needs and opinions of our citizens. And I'm very pleased, Mr. Chair, that this committee is seeking ways to strengthen civic engagement through charitable nations, and I look forward to your questions later.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. You should have before you a copy of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada's 10-page submission entitled Families, Compassion and Charities, Key Components to Maintaining a Strong Canada, arising from our pre-budget submission. The EFC is Canada's National Association of Evangelicals, with our 39 denominational affiliates representing half of Canada's 4 million evangelical Christians. We are convinced from a review of the giving and volunteering patterns of Canadians that the #1 way to sustain and increase charitable giving is to put more money in the hands of Canadian families. Families are facing mounting pressures in the midst of a challenging economy. Many have experienced increasing expenses while wages have been frozen or salary increases have failed to keep up with inflation. As a result, several of the steps taken by the Government of Canada to support Canadian families are or will be out of reach for many, particularly single-income families. Current tax laws require single-income families to pay up to 37% more in taxes than dual-income families. The government has promised to implement the family tax cut when the budget is balanced in 4 or 5 years' time. Canadians need the tax relief today. The families that will most benefit from such relief are also statistically the families that give the greatest percentage of their income to Canadian charities. We encourage the government to implement the family tax cut immediately and to focus on expanding the initiative to a full family household income splitting initiative. The compassionate generosity of Canadians, individuals, charities, and government is highly regarded worldwide. The evangelical Christian community is actively engaged with the lives of people struggling with poverty and homelessness, both in Canada and internationally. The relationship building and service that is undertaken is consistently offered on a non-discriminatory basis to those in need. Many efforts are entirely self-funded. Others take place in cooperation with the compassionate expression of Canadians through government funding and available tax incentives. The Canadian Christian community has long been a leader in caring for the less fortunate in Canada, from church groups inspired to serve sandwiches on the street corner to those providing refuge in extreme cold or the operation of multi-million-dollar addictions rehab centers, hostels, and food service programs. Love is shared in practical expression that meets human need. We encourage the Government of Canada to continue to partner with these effective organizations, thus enhancing and encouraging the generosity of Canadians and maximizing the impact of government expenditures. We also affirm the recommendations made in the 2011 All-Party Report of the HUMA Committee to establish a national poverty reduction strategy and develop in partnership with the provinces and territories a national housing strategy. Canadians are also recognized as among world leaders in the international development and emergency aid community. The Government of Canada is encouraged to continue to work cooperatively with organizations that have positive impact on the ground in foreign nations, continuing to provide incentives for Canadians to give, strategically matching donor dollars where appropriate, and reflecting Canadians' generosity in the financial expression of our federal government. With all levels of government, school boards, municipal, provincial, and federal, talking austerity and restraint, it is increasingly important that the charitable sector be supported as we are called upon to rise to meet the growing needs for our services. Statistics Canada has identified 6 top reasons Canadians offer for making a donation: compassion toward those in need, personal belief in the cause, contribution to the community, personally affected by the cause, religious beliefs, and the income tax credit. Just over half say they would increase their charitable giving if they were given a better tax credit. Those who attend religious services weekly or more give 3.5 times more to charity. Evangelical weekly attenders give 72% more to charity than weekly attenders of all faith groups. Evangelical groups are also giving 27% more to non-religious causes than non-Christians. The positive charitable giving patterns associated with the high levels of religious participation carry over into volunteering as well. Advancement of religion has long been recognized as a charitable purpose that means more than attendance at weekly church meetings. Evangelical Christians understand reasonable worship to include both the church service and community service. For us, advancement of religion includes the ability to engage in the public square through the provision of benevolent services to others and the presentation of biblical principle-based positions on public policy matters and other issues of concern, advancing the good of neighborhoods, the nation and those in need around the world. The EFC encourages the Government of Canada to give serious consideration to the tax credit proposals made by Cardis, Imagine Canada, and others to enhance Canadians' incentives to continue in their generosity toward others.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll begin members' questions. Mr. Julian, please.
I'd like to thank all members of our panel for coming forward today. We're familiar with the work of your organizations, and you do wonderful work in the community. I'd particularly like to underscore Big Brothers, Big Sisters, David Suzuki Foundation, the Evangelical Fellowship, because I'm most familiar with your work. Big Brothers, Big Sisters makes a big difference in Burnaby, New Westminster, and active in many schools and helping a variety of children and youth. David Suzuki Foundation, with your environmental and health-related work, makes a big difference in British Columbia. And the Evangelical Fellowship, I'm familiar with your work in street level and highlighting the growing concern around growing poverty and homelessness in this country. And so we really like to compliment you for coming forward today and for the work that you do every day. I'd like to start by asking about the stretch tax credit, because that's something that we've been discussing as a committee. And there have been some evaluations of what that might mean, both in terms of government support, but ultimately in terms of stimulating the charitable sector. So I'd like to hear from each one of you if your organization has done some sort of evaluation or projections of what a stretch tax credit would mean to increasing donations, both the number of donors, but also the overall resources that are available to your organizations.
Okay. Who would like to start this? Mr. Robinson, please.
Only because no one else put their hand up. We did do some evaluation of the three primary proposals that have been put forward. We looked at the stretch tax credit, and we felt that it had its biggest impact on new donors and donors of modest incomes. But as you've heard here earlier, most of the donations tend to come from those who are already giving. So when we looked at that further, we felt that of the three that are on the table, including the capital gains exemption for private shares and for real estate, that actually the one that would have the biggest benefit for an organization like ours was actually on the real estate.
Mr. Bruce.
In Council of Christian Charities, we considered it as well, and we have some concerns. Most of those who give to the church community tend to be those who give on base of principle, religious conviction and so forth. We are uncertain as to how exactly the stretch tax would help us in that regard, and when we looked at it, we're of the view that it was going to be complicated, and so as an organization, we propose for the increase of the tax credit as a whole rather than the tax credit process.
Sure. I mean, as an organization that has, all these branches across the country, as we've looked at this, our feeling is that because our core competency in terms of driving revenue really has come from the corporate community over the years, that a real new area of growth for us is in mission-based individual givers. The idea of attracting new donors from existing donors, and we realize that many of these people are already giving to other charities, having an additional incentive to make a larger gift or a new gift for us was one of the reasons why we felt the stretch tax credit was appealing.
Yeah. I think there may be two things to assist you in this kind of consideration. Number one is the investigation of existing research to actually illustrate that a tax strategy is the best tool in order to attract new donors into the charitable world. At Cardis, we don't know of any solid or substantive research that actually makes that argument, that proves it. We know by experience that the charitable tax credit itself prompts donations. That's not in question. So I think the first piece would be to look for research, if it's out there. We have not been able to find that research that proves the ability of a tax measure to attract new donors. It's our sense that this is a cultural issue. To attract new donors is more of a cultural issue than it is a tax strategy. The second is a question about whether it's material to the whole charitable sector. The stretch credit, the challenge with it, and remember, if you just increase the charitable tax credit itself, you accomplish the interest of the stretch credit as well. my sense is that a dollar amounts the stretch credit will raise is not going to be significant to the challenge that the charitable sector is actually dealing with. What we do in a way by acknowledging the stretch credit is we're saying here's a solution, but it's a solution to a very small part of the problem. We already know that tax measures are only one small piece of the solution. Why would we employ a tax measure like the stretch credit that just simply is not material enough to kind of capture the enormity of the challenge we're dealing with?
Okay, I have two more to comment, but we are actually well over Mr. Julian's time. We will come back to this. I know it'll be a common theme throughout this, so I am going to go to Ms. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too would like to thank everyone for all the great work that all of your organizations do, and could talk again specifically in our community of Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, some great work that's happening. I think what I've heard, I think we've had 4 suggestions now. We've had stretch tax credit, we've had raising from 27 to 42, we've had the real estate and private shares. So those are really the substantial suggestions that have come forward in terms of the opportunities. What I would like to focus my first question on, though, is the real estate one, and perhaps to Mr. Robinson. And certainly when we heard from Karen Cooper at the Canadian Trust Alliance, who talked about the extension of capital gains exemption to gifts of real estate will undermine the existing eco-gift program, and that was, of course, first established to combat habitat loss and to conserve important wildlife habitats and ecologically sensitive land. So I guess, you know, from her perspective, she was really thinking some of the others would be more preferable because she was quite concerned about the impact in terms of her organization. And I know that you actually were speaking in favor of that, and so could you maybe give us your perspective on that particular issue?
Certainly, thank you. I should also just say that we're in favor of all of the initiatives that would actually stimulate donations. But when I said that real estate would have a positive impact, a more positive impact, I look at some of the patterns and history we've had, and a lot of our donors might have second properties, cabins, recreational property. And so removing the exemption there is consistent with what they've already told us in terms of their legacies and what they want to give. I think that the earlier material you heard is actually quite important because we're thinking essentially of residential properties. There would need to be some caveats and some restrictions around making sure that what we wouldn't lose are, of course, valuable ecological pieces of property that would then be developed. So you would have to build in there some restrictions on that.
Okay. So my next question is focused perhaps to Mr. Bussey, and I know we're talking about tax incentives, but there's 2 things that you actually talked about that piqued my interest, and one was your charity certification program with independent standards. So could you maybe talk a little bit about that and how they compare to Revenue Canada and accreditation, and how much further do they go? So briefly share with us a little bit about that piece.
Sure. Happy to. We have, since 1983, have established a seal of accountability process in which we have 3,200 members, but not every one of those members have reached to be able to advertise the seal of accountability, the 4 C's seal of accountability. We have about 180 some charities right now who have achieved that. There are a number of things that they are required to do. They're to have an independent, active governing board. They have to have an independent financial audit that the 4 C's will also audit their charity to make sure that they're fulfilling the obligations and the standards of 4 C's. They need to be committed to public financial disclosure. They need to undertake regular evaluation of programs for their effectiveness and efficiency, and need to have these policies and processes in place. We also have a code of accountability dealing with ethical fundraising and financial accountability that we require our members, with this seal to be able to follow, and also policies dealing with integrity. So we have this as an ongoing process, and we actually audit these members. When they have the seal of accountability, we're standing behind them.
You also briefly mentioned CRA flexibility. Was that only in relationship to your comments later about foreign, how you were able to expend and move into foreign countries, or were there other, and maybe we'll have to leave it for another time, but if you could think about it, okay. Perhaps I'll have another round.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McLeod. We'll go to Mr. Bryson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to each of you for appearing before us today. I've been an MP for almost 15 years, and over the last year or so, I've been hearing more from people in the nonprofit sector about CRA, Revenue Canada audits, and an increased level of audit activity from Revenue Canada, and particularly around the area of advocacy. And I'd be very interested to hear if you have, as individual organizations, experienced or seen that kind of change in recent years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the evangelical community, it's a very interesting thing because, of course, for us, our expression of faith is not something that is kept private. It's something that extends into the public square and includes presentation on public policy initiatives. So that, yes, there are questions from the CRA in that regard. We can't verify whether the increase in audit activity is because of complaints or whether it is because of an audit cycle and the random selection. But we do know that we're making more of an effort to inform members of the evangelical community as to the guidelines in CPS 022 that talks about political activities. We've tried to simplify it because, you know, when you think about the average charity, they don't function with a lawyer and an accountant, and they function with people from the community. And oftentimes in an evangelical church, the most educated person is the person who's standing in the pulpit, and his or her training has not been in law and finance. So we try to simplify and communicate the information, but it does seem that there are more questions about advocacy-related issues. For us, and within our community, we try to encourage that the engagement be based on biblical principles so that we're actually advancing our religious beliefs in our participation in the community rather than simply advocating for something that is the most popular item in the political world of the day.
Thank you.
Mr. Robinson?
Okay. Well, I've been with the organization for 4 years, as I mentioned earlier, and in the time I've been there has been no correspondence between DSF and the CRA, and it's a good relationship. I can say that there were letters that had come to the organization before my time, and I believe it was on the basis of that the organization put in place what the CRA tries to make sure that you don't tiptoe over the lines. So we put in place the mechanisms to make sure that we would not receive one of those letters again. The only downside of that, and I think this goes to your question, is that it means that we spend quite a bit of time when we come to putting forward public policy statements or opinions, just to make sure that we've taken into account the implications of that with respect to charity rules. That's not a bad thing, but it does mean that we put additional effort to do that.
1 minute, Mr. Bryson.
Yeah, there's a real challenge in trying to delineate between political advocacy and expressing public policy views which reflect your expertise or the views of your members. And I see that 10% figure as being a difficult one to quantify, so that's something I think we ought to consider as a committee. Quick question, final question, and that's on the area of impact investing and social finance. I have the report here from the Canadian Task Force on Social Finance with people ranging from Stanley Hart, former Deputy Finance Minister and Chief of Staff to Brian Mulroney, to Paul Martin, of course, Prime Minister and Finance Minister. And do you believe that we should, as a committee, as part of the study, spend some time studying the potential public policies to mobilize impact investing?
Let's have one person respond to this. Mr. Byrd, please.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think one of the things that's emerged in recent years and reflected in the task force report and its update in 1 year, and we see this at foundations. Foundations are key impact investors and responsible investors, is those intelligent gifts that were made, in part incented by the public policy regime around tax, have created endowments. They've created pools of capital that enable the kinds of investments you're talking about. So they're not separated out from. This is one of the key sources of community capital through which communities can be strengthened. And so if you could follow the chain between the tax incentive opportunities that you're going to recommend and what that means for impact investing, you'd be doing a good service for the country.
Thank you. Thank you. Go to Mr. Hoback, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. And Mr. Robinson, you talked about being here on Valentine's Day. Well, just take comfort in knowing it's my 25th anniversary. Soon you and I can be in the doghouse together, and we'll enjoy the doghouse together today. You know, there's lots of areas to go in this discussion, but I think I'm going to go after an area that's a little bit closer to me, and it's about accountability, and it's to do with the fundraising techniques that some of the organizations use, and just looking for some ideas on what to do. And I'll give you some context to where I'm going. I had an uncle who was about 85 who passed away here in December. I'm the executive of his estate, so I'm going through his mail, and I'm going through items that are coming in his mail. And what really, really is upsetting is the letters he was getting from groups claiming to be evangelical groups or being Christian groups, and the amount of mail they were sending him to get donations, to get more donations. And I guess what was frustrating is when you looked at those groups, they're groups that I'd never heard of, but they're running under a Christian banner, an evangelical banner. And I know there's lots of good Christian evangelical groups, so I'm not criticizing that. I guess what I'm wondering is have you put in a system to evaluate these groups and to say to people, these are true groups under your association that you would certify as saying they're reputable groups, they're reputable in the work they do, they're reputable in how the money hits the ground. Have you looked at doing anything like that? And maybe I'll start it off with you, Mr. Hutchison, and move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada lists all of its affiliates on our website, whether they are our denominational affiliates or the ministry organizations, the Bible colleges and post-secondary education institutions, liberal arts institutions, and the individual congregational affiliates. So people can check there. In addition to that, we do work cooperatively. We're a member of the Canadian Council of Christian Charities. They are an affiliate of the EFC, and they also have a members list that is available to the general public.
What do you do to promote that list? I know internet is great for me and my generation, but for the senior generation, you know, my dad's 82, he's on the internet more than probably I am, but there is a group that doesn't have access to the internet or that information. So do you publicly go out and say, here's a list of good groups, and do you actually publish groups that you say do not cut or do not make the grade?
It's really not our position to indicate who doesn't make the grade once they've been approved through the CRA process. CRA makes those decisions on charities. What we do have available is a 1-800 number if somebody wanted to call us and ask about a charity. But publishing the list, the 39 denominations, the 80 organizations, the 34 schools, then nearly 1,000 congregations, we'd be publishing a book to distribute to people, but they'd be welcome to call our 1-800 number and we would check for them.
Okay, so you set up a process that if I had a question, I could call your organization and have that, at least that group checked out to say whether or not they're part of your approved list.
You'd be surprised at people who manage to get through to me on my phone line and ask some very interesting questions. So I think that a donor who wanted to ask, and I know the 4Cs also has a 1-800 number.
Mr. Busty, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, like to add that, as I mentioned, we do have this seal of accountability. We're actually in the process right now of developing a separate website that's going to even advertise in a much more stark way those who have reached the seal of accountability. We also do advertising in newspapers and so forth where we list all of our members who have reached the seal. But certainly, I think your point is well taken. That for the seniors who are not into the internet age, we need to be more mindful of that, and I appreciate that.
Okay. Mr. Robertson, with environmental groups, do you see something similar as an issue when you have groups claim to be environmental groups? Do you evaluate, or do you belong to an association that would evaluate those groups to say they actually get the dollars where they claim to be putting them?
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, I do believe that all organizations should be accountable and have information that's easily accessed by potential donors. It's not quite the same as the other fellowships. The environmental community is so different. You can have a little tiny group that does bog restoration in Prince Rupert, and then the larger groups. I think it's more a matter of the closer it is to the community in which located, it's usually pretty reasonable to know who they are and whether you would want to give. When you get to the larger groups, all of the larger groups are, I think, pretty good at being transparent about reporting information, and would hope to be increasingly so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hoback. Monsieur Maille, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to thank all the witnesses who are here today.
My question, first of all, for Mr. Robinson, you've mentioned the fact that there are possibilities of getting funds from overseas. Can you explain to us what are the process, or how do we make application for grants for a U.S. foundation organization?
That's a good question, because I think sometimes it's been portrayed that the money comes with strings attached. The way that you apply for grants from any international philanthropic organizations, foundations, is you actually have to make an application, and they're actually quite detailed packages in which you say, here's the project that we'd like to do, and here are the outcomes that we'd like to achieve, and here's how we would spend the money. They go into these organizations, and clearly you look at organizations that have a track record of giving funds in that area. So if we had a marine project, we wouldn't send it to a group that doesn't do marine work. And then it's evaluated. Not all projects are approved. If they are, they have very tight strings attached, but not the strings that say this is what you must do. It is, here is the reporting we'd like, here's when we'd like it. We make sure that you don't spend the money on something that you didn't apply for. So, it is a very competitive process, and you have to be really clear about what you want to achieve and be prepared not to get that grant in the first place.
Okay. Thank you very much. Question for Mr. Hutchison. You mentioned in your brief, and also because we're finding, and especially in my writing from Brossard-la-Prairie, we have organizations who are helping family who actually have jobs, and they're now coming to food banks and things like that. So and you have mentioned that there needs to be work from the government regarding fighting poverty. Do you feel that in terms of how things have gone lately, in terms of increased demand from services that you have, and what should the government do?
Well, as we've suggested, one area where the government could move very quickly would be to bring equity into the tax system for households, so that single-income households would not be penalized as they are now. We were quite encouraged when we saw the HUMA report, and discouraged when it was very quickly discounted by the government. We would like to see that report given additional study and consider the issues. In the economic climate in which we currently existing, Canadian families are both in danger and actually slipping into the poverty area, as you've mentioned. Food banks are having more visitors. People who are employed are attending missions to have meals, and some missions actually now have a dinner, one dinner a week or 2 dinners a week that they're promoting as helping families to stretch their budgets. And we're seeing with increased costs in gasoline, hydroelectricity, all of those things that all have tax components to them, that the government could, the federal government in any event, could deal with the tax components that are federal and look at other means of regulation. The bottom line is the vast majority of Canadian families are facing 0 or below inflation rate increases in their wages, and I think that's impacting the housing market. It's impacting people who are going to food banks, people who are going to other meal programs, and creating a danger for our culture. We also need to be mindful that people who earn $20,000 a year or less are actually people who give more of their income to charities, 3.6%. And as your income goes up, you may give more dollars actually, but the percentage of income you give to charity goes down. And StatsCan, in their 2007 report, defined Canada's top donors as the 25% of the top donors in the country. They had to work their numbers all the way down to top donors starting at $364 a year. And that tells me that we have a problem with income and overtaxation that needs to be dealt with.
Thank you. I see Mr. Meyer. We'll go to Mr. Adler, please.
Hey, thank you, Chair. I want to commend all of you for all of the great work that you do in this field, and thank you for doing the work that you do. I just want to pick up on something that Mr. Van Pelt said about it tends to be the same amount of people, or the same people who tend to give over and over again, and you know, we see that sort of in our work too. How do we create a culture of giving in this country? Is it through increased incentives, or is it through education? Could you just talk a bit about that, how we create that culture, in your estimation?
Thank you. It's an extremely difficult question, and that's why Cardis in our proposal argues for change in the charitable tax credit, but along with that, a whole new debate about what it is to give and care for your neighbor, because the tax credit is really an interim. It's an interim measure to solve a problem that right now we seem to not know how to solve. So there's all kinds of connections, and Don made some of them. What's the relationship between charitable giving and the state of religion in the country? What's the relationship between mobility and charitable giving? There's so many questions in those areas that we have not tackled. We've not said this is a great Canadian debate. If there's anything that I would respectfully challenge you in your position of leadership in this country, is to use your position of having voice to make this a much bigger issue. At some point, we will make the connection between the state of charitable giving in this country and the strength of our economy. We're not yet there. We're not making those links, but at some point we will make those links, and all of a sudden this will become an issue that we want to talk about. Why don't we kick that into gear before the numbers start making those links all on their own? Look at the state of the family. When you looked at the demographics, all of a sudden the state of the family becomes an economic issue. We need more children to be able to create economic productivity and growth, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing is going to happen in the charitable sector. At some point, it's going to be an economic conversation. It's not going to be how good you feel about your neighbor conversation. We need to hit the conversation, and you, I respectfully suggest, can take the leadership, because you have a platform that nobody else has to do that.
Okay, Mr. Adler, there's 2 more that want to comment. It's up to you. You have Mr. Hutchinson and Mr. McDonald.
I'll come back to them. I just want to follow up on this. And demographics are clearly working against us on all of this. Is that correct? Like our aging population, we're going to have less people, younger people who are working. And where is that charitable giving going to come from?
See, this is fascinating. If you look at the tax expenditure, the tax expenditure lines, okay, as they're from 2005 to 2011, as they're published by your government, then jump onto David Foote's website, okay, and look at David Foote's demographic bubble transition. You know, he always, you know, this year, this year, this year, and this year. Right now, we actually should have a dramatic interest in charitable giving because we're going through a baby boomer period that have, their kids are finished university, they have disposable income, they still have traditions of giving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That will come to an end. So I am quite fearful about this matter. Nobody has done research, to my knowledge, to overlay the charitable tax expenditures with the demographic bubble shifting giving. That needs to be done yet to help answer your question.
Now the window is open. Now we can do it, right?
That's correct.
It's just going to be too late. Okay. Okay. Just Mr. Bird, you want to comment?
Just, I mean,
So it's up to you, but you had Mr. Hutchinson and Mr. McDonald.
Oh, okay.
So, and there's a minute left. I'm just trying to manage members' times as best I can.
Yeah. Okay. So Mr. McDonald, do you want to? You had a comment on?
I think it's a great question, and I don't think it's a simple answer. I think that's the challenge, is that, you know, tax incentives alone are, and I agree with Michael's point. It's not one. There's not a magic bullet here. I think these are a combination of absolutely, tax incentives are part of the pie. I think it's engagement of volunteers. I think it's understanding the changing nature of Canada, not just from an aging population, but from new Canadians, the youth of Aboriginal and growth of Aboriginal populations in this country, and how do we engage them in making Canada a better place. Our experience, certainly in the Big Brothers Big Sisters world, and I can really only speak to that context, is the more engaged people are, the more likely they are to be volunteers. That's an overly simplistic, or sorry, they're more likely to be donors. It's an overly simplistic formula, but I think it's a very complicated question.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Adler, we're over time. I'm trying to be fair to all members. I'm sorry to the two witnesses, but I have to be equal to members. It's only fair. We'll go to Monsieur Giguère, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My first question is perhaps best addressed to all of the witnesses. In my riding right now, I have 3 food banks. Those 3 food banks are essential for the poor, for the elderly, for students, and all those populations which after 4 years of an economic mess cannot afford a reasonable grocery basket. My problem is that all charities are treated the same way when it comes to donations and tax credits. I'd like to know your opinion if there was a variable rate according to the urgency of the work provided by a charity, such as Meals on Wheels or food banks. I have CEGEP students who absolutely need this in order to pay their tuition, their housing, and live. That's a general question I'm putting out there.
Mr. Bird, if you want to comment on this, then I'll give you a second. Mr. Hutchinson.
That's an excellent question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The pressure that food banks are facing is the increasing number of people and the decrease in donations. Encouraging corporate sponsors, and more corporate sponsors are coming forward and contributing substantial amounts of food in addition to people who are giving financially, would be tremendous. I don't know how confusing a variable rate of donation would be, but I think that what we've seen in the international sphere, where there have been government matching programs on donations, could work with trying to develop corporate matching programs in communities or government matching programs for emergency needs within the country, not just outside of the country. It's my thought. It's not something I've studied. It seems like you've come up with a terrific concept.
Okay, we have Mr. Bird and then Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the experience we've had is that isolating particular elements and challenges in a community may mean we overlook the whole experience and the interconnections of community life. And I think we're having a good discussion here around the table about this sort of decline in civic involvement, this decline in a civic sensibility, some of the cultural components to this. And so what we see at community foundations is, in fact, some of the activities that would go on that may look like they don't have an impact on the food security of a particular family, in fact, have a very important connection. It could be their involvement in a faith-based institution. It could be their involvement in community recreation opportunity. It could be their involvement in another part of the community that builds and bridges their connections at the community level. So in our perspective, the good public policy is one that looks at the whole community and would provide an opportunity that would be allow that community to identify its priorities and benefit as a result.
Okay, Mr. MacDonald.
Yeah, I think there was an interesting element in a term that you used in terms of urgency. And I think one of the challenges that I could see in thinking about that question is, how do you define one being more urgent than the other? And, you know, I agree. I think that the voluntary sector, the charitable nonprofit sector, has a wide range of offerings to make Canada a better place. And I think we could have a really long and perhaps never-ending debate over the value of a service that needs to be provided immediately versus one that has a long-term transformative nature, and to say that we're going to give potentially a priority of one over the other. I think that if you use urgency as a benchmark, it could be a really interesting and potentially messy debate.
Okay. Monsieur Giguet, 30 seconds.
30 seconds, Mr. Giguet. Well, a very quick question. Right now, there are donations below $200 and over $200 that are treated differently for tax purposes. For somebody earning $60,000, maybe $200 isn't much, but for somebody who earns $20,000, $200 is a lot of money. So could you tell me whether you'd be in favor of a single rate of tax credit, whether it's above or below $200?
One response to this, Mr. Byrd.
Yeah, I mean, our response is that we think that this invitation to Canadians that the stretch tax credit provides is to enable those who may not have given anything at all to then benefit from a tax incentive provided by their government. And that would open up a whole new pool of donors. Mr. Julian asked the question, and Parliament's own budget officer has done some of the research to identify some 600,000 new donors that this might bring into the system. So that would be our perspective.
Thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for appearing again before us here this afternoon. I want to go in another direction. We had a witness here last week, Dr. Paul Reid, told the committee, and I quote, that one of the dominant reasons Canadians give for not contributing or not contributing more to charitable organizations is that they already support the provision of community and social services through already paying considerable and rising taxes. I'm curious. We've endeavored as a government to partner up in areas like CETA when there was a need. And I'm going to take this back to the community, but abroad, which is much of the charitable giving that all of your organizations are involved in. We have found that it's very popular that when the government makes the requests or gives the challenge, that Canadians respond favorably. And I would suspect, and I think you'd all agree too, that taxes are levied and we really have no say. But charitable giving, now we've got a choice where we're going to put our money. I wonder if maybe you, Mr. Bussey, could first tell the committee how important those types of endeavors are. And then maybe if you've ever thought about how we could expand that to the community. Say we do a lot of social housing where we could start to partner up, much as we do with NGOs in other countries. I'll start with you, Mr. Bussey.
And you're referring to the CETA experience?
We'll talk about Haiti, or the tsunami in Japan and prior to that. But anytime there's a catastrophe, an earthquake or something, we offer that to Canadian people.
Right. And certainly in our membership, we have a number of of development agencies and so forth around the world, and people respond to the crisis of the day, as it were, in which the churches and the church organizations are able to get involved. We think of MCC and so forth. That's the Mennonite Central Committee and like organizations. And they are, we find that as a community, as a faith-based community, when we see these international needs, the people certainly give, even though they're already giving to their local churches, but into the international needs and so forth, they go forward. But I'm not sure I'm fully understanding your question. What is it exactly?
These proved to be quite successful. Have you thought about those types of projects within the community? You know, and I suggested housing, for instance.
Right, right. Well, of course, the problem is with the church-based community, of which we are, is that we struggle with our definitions of fitting under advancement of religion. And so we have to be careful that when we get involved in social enterprise activities, currently the requirement is now that if we are involved in those things, it has to be incidental to advancement of religion. One of the projects, for example, the MCC uses the thrift store. They're able to get involved because 90% of their staff are volunteers. And that makes it very difficult for them, you know, to maintain that staff and so forth. It takes a lot of effort. The church community is very much interested in doing more social enterprise, but they are very concerned about their status with CRA in doing so.
Maybe can you just comment on that very 30 seconds, and maybe talk about why the tax issue is so important. When we're taxed more, people seem to give a little bit less. Maybe you could just mention that as well.
The question that you're getting at is the question of leverage. Globe and Mail has done some great research on this. I encourage you to look at it. They estimated that 43% of all charities, except your big universities, taking your universities, hospitals away, etc., 43% of their revenues are are through government. And then the question becomes, how do you fill in and how do you leverage? We're dealing with that at Minister Finley's advisory committee. This struggle at HRSDC about how we leverage funds. What's interesting, if you would pull away the organizations that get no government funding, I would suspect it would move into the 60%, and that's a fearful percentage. The question then becomes for you as a parliamentarian is, where is the dollar amount itself most effectively and productively used? And I would suggest in some cases, not in all. There is a role for government in many of these spaces. One is mental illness, for example. There are so many illustrations where mental illness and being able to deal with mental illness needs integrated community involvement to be able to deliver it effectively, not just the services of government. Okay. A great example where you have to have a much better leveraged effort for being able to provide that service than what we're presently doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. We'll go to Ms. Sims, please.
Thank you. And first of all, like others, I want to thank you for coming to make your presentations. And I've had the privilege of working with a number of groups, definitely through the Boys and Girls Club. And I'm always impressed with the work that comes out of the Suzuki Foundation and the faith groups that are absolutely instrumental in providing much needed support in communities right across, but specifically in my community of Newton North Delta. There I would say, whether it's the church, whether it's the mosque, or whether it's the mandir, or whether it's the gurdwara, I'm really impressed with the work done by the faith community to fill a gap that is ever growing. And it's no surprise to anybody, all of us know that the gap between the rich and poor is growing in Canada. And so for me, one of the things that as I sat here and listened to all of your presentations is that when you hold charitable status, you may be a food bank, you may be an evangelical organization, you may be the Boys and Girls Club, but you're all dealing with a lot of things that are happening in our communities that are there because of public policy. And the best way to address those is through public policy. And yet, I heard that there is some feeling of trepidation about engaging in public policy or advocacy. I see advocacy as engaging in a way to affect changes in public policy. So if that was to happen, or if you're feeling that, how is that going to impact the work you do right now? Because then will you just become a place where people just go for a meal, and you won't be able to do the kind of work you need to have a national poverty reduction plan, let's say, that we know is very much needed. So I want to know how those kind of rumors or things we hear out there about cuts to some charitable advocacy work could impact the work you do right now.
Mr. Hutchinson?
This is related to a question we heard earlier, Mr. Chair, and that has to do with civic responsibility. One of the benefits, if you will, to the current economic situation is people who are accessing food banks and soup kitchens are actually volunteering to work in those places and teaching their children about it. We used to learn civics in high school. Most high schools don't talk about civics anymore. We still talk about civics in the church, caring for your neighbor, and other religious communities have similar types of conversations. I think where the government could really partner well with the charitable sector would be in some of the type of advertising similar to the Economic Action Plan, encouraging Canadians to get involved with the charities in their community, to get involved in various ways in the civic life of their community, whether they get involved in the municipal government, provincial government, or whether they go to the local food bank or elsewhere. Rabbi Bulka has repeatedly stated in very public settings, and I really appreciate what this man has to say, it's not about giving back, it's about giving. And when it's about giving instead of giving back, it's not because you owe something, it's because you're moved in your heart to be compassionate toward the need of others.
Ms. Sims, you have 1 minute.
I really have to comment on a high school in my community, Princess Margaret School. They did a whole week on poverty, where the kids had to develop a plan, do a budget, and they had to give up something that they really loved. And every one of them wrote me a letter, and I'll tell you, if you were to read those letters, it would bring tears to your eyes. So we do have schools that are doing civic responsibility and are looking at issues. But I wanted to ask one other question, if I may. Okay, 30 seconds quickly, and that is, how could we be encouraging more schools? And I would say it's if we were to move away from the standardized testing agenda so that we had time to do more of civic responsibility, then we could be doing some of that work.
This is when a member puts me in the wonderful position of asking a very good question at the end of her time. Is there someone who can just address this very briefly? Okay. Mr. Byrd?
Yeah. One suggestion is there are youth and philanthropy programs right across the country. They're in community foundations, but they're in other institutions. United Ways, I'm sure there's a connection through Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and almost anyone here, there's some kind of youth initiative to connect a school to. So.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Jean, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I just wanted to start with Mr. Byrd. Now, in passing, you'd said great foundations up in northern Alberta. Was that what you said to me?
That's right.
Are you talking about Fort McMurray in particular?
Yeah, just in the region of Grand Prairie, right through to northern Alberta.
So you have a lot of response from people in that area donating money to foundations?
Indeed, yeah. Alberta is one of the most generous provinces in the whole country.
In fact, we heard evidence earlier, and this is, of course, from my constituents, that the United Way gets more donations per capita from Fort McMurray than any other city in the country.
Well, there you are. Civic responsibility is alive and well in Fort McMurray.
Now, I was the chair of the Children's Health Foundation up in Northern Alberta for years, and in fact, we raised millions upon millions of dollars in that area for children and did very, very well. But that's not my question. That was my comment, just to give back to the constituents that give so much.
Wasn't it about the oil of Elijah for a second there?
Yeah, no, not exactly. I hope that comment doesn't come off my time, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in transparency of nonprofit and generally organizations that don't have to pay taxes and the transparency that they make to the people that donate. In particular, I'm interested in the independent sector in the United States. Is anybody familiar with that organization, the independent sector of 600, approximately 600 organizations that set mission statements and 100 best practice guides? Nobody's familiar with that? Well, I won't go into that then, but what I am interested in is what's happening in the United States compared to what's happening in Canada. And we heard from the CRA earlier during the study that we have some transparency on the CRA website, in particular the 10 highest paid staff positions, and not the particulars of the name, et cetera, just a general guide of where people are paid and what amount they are paid, not specifically, but within $10,000. And also, there is no disclosure of the 10 highest paid contractors. Now, in the United States, heard evidence recently in the Natural Resources Committee that they actually publish the 10 highest paid staff members, including their names, and the 10 highest paid contractors of those organizations, including their names. So my understanding from that evidence that we heard that day was they actually have much more transparency in the United States in relation to not only where the money is going for each organization, but where it's coming from. Is that your understanding as well? Anybody?
Is it our understanding there's a difference between the regulatory environment in the United States and in Canada?
Mm-hmm. In particular, that the transparency in the United States for taxpayers is much more transparent than it is in Canada.
Yeah, well, I think there are a series of efforts that are underway meant to increase transparency in Canada. And I do believe that CRA is actively involved in those, and those are well advised. And in fact, it's something that's held in common right across both foundations and charities around their own activities. So I think the movement towards transparency is well advised.
And in fact, I was looking at best practices, and accountability and transparency was what is seen as most publishers on the websites was a key to keeping nonprofit sectors on course. Would you agree with that?
Well, indeed, the Blue Ribbon panel that your government put in place really had this in mind. And there's been a real incentive by leading organizations such as Imagine Canada to see the implementation of the Blue Ribbon panel's recommendations. And the work at Treasury boards, a key part of that, also within the line departments. This provides an opportunity for CRA to ensure that its efforts are also in line with the rest of the government. And we had an earlier discussion about leverage and the opportunity of matching funding. I mean, this is something that your government's actively involved with already. Canadian Heritage is providing incentive grants, as we've heard about, and CETA's doing the same thing. And that environment, if it's strengthened upon the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon panel, would create more impact in communities, because the investment of the Government of Canada would be aligned with the kinds of investments that come forward from Canadians through gifts that are earned through activities like the ones that Barry was talking about. So I think your efforts to encourage the adoption of the Blue Ribbon panel recommendations will make these tax incentives go further. So it's a great question.
Thank you, Mr. Jean.
Thank you very much.
I too want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but Mr. Bird, I'm going to give you a heads up because I'm going to come back to you, but I'm going to give you a heads up as to what the question is going to be. In your submission, you talked about some suggestions for regulatory changes, and so I'm going to ask you about those, give you a chance to think about it, because I don't have the submission from the Philanthropic Foundation, so I'll come back to you. But Mr. MacDonald, I happen to be a very big supporter of Big Brothers and Big Sisters. I sat on the board for Big Sisters before we amalgamated in Winnipeg, and I happened to be, I think, the first parent of a matched child who ever did sit on a board for your organization. But bequests, I think that's how you say it, when people bequeath their property. I'm going to ask you about that specifically because we have talked a lot about tax incentives, which quite frankly seem to target the same donors who are already donating, although we are looking to, raise the number of donors, but I'm looking for ways to target some folks that we're missing. When I was policing, there were an awful lot of seniors who don't have children, who didn't have wills, and we go to their sudden deaths, and I always wondered, how could we educate? Because unfortunately, many of those ended up in court settings, and it's unfortunate because some of these folks, were linked to organizations. The reason I'm asking you, Mr. McDonald, is because when I sat on the board with Big Sisters, there was a large donation by an elderly woman of her home upon her death, and I'm wondering, are there any things that we as a government could do to encourage the bequeathing of property, given what I've seen and given that your organization has, as I know, benefited from it? And if you don't have an answer today, I do want you to think about it, and all of you to think about how we might target that. And I think what Mr. and I'm sorry, is Johnson or Hutchinson, sorry, said about advertising isn't really a bad idea, because people might not know that these opportunities exist. So in targeting people who don't donate, do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a response from the government side. I mean, sitting here initially, I'm not sure that there's something that really top of mind leaps to mind. I immediately went to the organizational side, because we've seen these on an occasional basis happen across the country for an organization like ours. Now, I know there's lots of other organizations who have more fully formed or rigorous plan giving programs. As one of the things that unfortunately has happened with us is we've lost touch with a lot of people over the years instead of keeping them engaged for a very long span of time. I think on our side of the equation, that's the cultural shift that needs to happen, so that when people are involved with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, in our specific case, that we're able to stay in touch, build a relationship, so at the point that they are making these kinds of decisions, that it's been written in. And we're seeing that happen.
I'm sorry to cut you off,
Yep,
but I do
that's
want to
fine.
get to Mr. Bird's answer,
Yep.
and I do want you to write in afterwards, anyone
Sure.
who has an idea on how we might maybe tap into that. It would
Yep.
be good. Mr. Bird, go ahead.
Yeah, the regulatory environment in Canada has yet to catch up to all the opportunities that are out there for community investment by pools of capital, such as might be with foundations or pension funds or other such places, that would assist a community's social enterprises. And so Mr. Bryson asked the question about should this be examined, and one of the reasons to answer yes was the one I gave. The other one is because of the regulatory environment. So I'll give you an example. A limited partnership that's an activity for an environmental social enterprise may well be the best vehicle to achieve that environmental objective and an economic benefit, a financial return. And at the moment, the available pools of capital in our foundation environment, in the case of community foundations, that's $3 billion in capital, cannot be placed in that limited partnership, whereas it can in the UK, and whereas there's an evolution, as we just heard about in the United States. So for Canada to make available its community capital, we could improve the regulatory environment to allow for that, and then limited partnerships would open up, and that capital would be available to those enterprises.
Okay, there's about 30 seconds. Mr. Bussey did want to comment. It's up to you.
And I'll get to you, but through you, Chair, could we get a copy of the Philanthropic Foundation's report, which makes some recommendations on the regulatory? And Mr. Bussey, go ahead.
I just wanted to make mention that as a member of the Canadian Bar, the law societies across the country will often have a special Wills Day and so forth offered to the public. But it takes me back as well to the concept and the idea. Remember, many years ago, the government supported the importance of Canadians to exercise, and so there were all kinds of ads for participation and so on. And I'm wondering almost if we shouldn't have a participation kind of initiative on behalf of the government to give to charities and so forth. Because I do think, I know as a youngster growing up in our schools in Canada, seeing all of those ads on TV, I mean, I always wanted to play hockey anyhow, but that's, you know, it was just like, yeah, I'm part of the culture, you know, that kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Julian, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start off just by giving each of you a chance to answer Ms. Sims' question around in the schools, putting that culture of giving and charitable organizations, instructing a new generation of folks, of Canadian children and youth to get involved. If you have suggestions, comments on that, we'd really appreciate hearing.
Mr. Robinson.
Well, I would suggest, though, that trying to raise awareness on giving at the school level has got a couple of problems attached to it. I think what you would want to do is expose kids early to some of the benefits that these charities are doing, so they're better educated about what charities are doing in their communities and see the impacts of them, and even potentially participate as volunteers. And then that's a way for them to be encouraged to be much more participatory, and then as they get older, then to move into a culture of giving, rather than come straight at them and hit them with, you know, you need to be a giver. That'd be my only comment on that earlier question.
We have Mr. McDonald and then Mr. Hutchinson.
Yeah, I agree. I think the first step is around civic engagement, and how do kids understand the role that their coaches are volunteers, their, you know, some of the people who they interact, their mentor they're all volunteers playing a role in their community, and that these need support. I think that's the first place. And the other thing is there's a network of organizations like Big Brothers Big Sisters that are out there that can help be the ambassadors of that. And, you know, it's funny, we've had some internal conversations around, you know, what's the role that our mentor volunteers play when sitting with a young person in a school or at a community center, and those kinds of conversations that they can have. We can be part of that voice.
Okay.
Again, it is a good question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The integration in the community is so vital, and a number of organizations are engaging with extracurricular activities, such as World Vision Canada's 30-hour famine, which has become very popular in the high schools and helps to identify with the cause as well. A number of provinces now require a certain number of community service hours working with these charitable and community-minded organizations as part of the process to graduate, so you're actually getting a practical introduction to civics. But there's nothing quite like the civics class itself talking about what's out there. It's amazing to me the number of young people who are unaware of how government operates. They're unaware that in Canada we have several levels of government, and they're completely unaware of our Constitution. These types of things, and I would hearken back to another great advertising campaign, Barry, is the Canadian Heritage Minutes. Great opportunity to introduce people to the realities of civics if they're not going to get it in high school. That's something the federal government is allowed to do.
Mr. Appel wanted to comment too, Mr. Julian. Is it?
Yeah, maybe if I can take this in a touch of a critical way. If you observe over the last 40 years, a lot of the conversation about the problems we're facing or the challenges that we're dealing with, we've defaulted to fewer and fewer institutions to actually solve the problems of those challenges. So if you're on the right, you kind of default to the market to say the market will solve the problem. And if you're on the left, it's the government that solves the problem. So a lot of the conversation, and even in a young environment, becomes okay, here's the problem, and what institution, and it will be the government that actually solves the problem. So the impulse, even in popular news talk radio, the impulse is, what can government do? What's missing is that whole conversation about those institutions in between government and market, about what they can do. Just look at the future of service clubs in this country. That's a little story there, a really critical story there about us needing to change the conversation about what institution is best to solve the very problems that we're wanting to talk about at school.
You've got about 30 seconds.
Well, I asked that question in the context of being a kid in New Westminster and rolling the pennies to make local charitable donations with a bunch of my buddies, we collected pop bottles and taken them down to the store and then gave the money to charity. So it can start at an early age. The other question that I wanted to ask, I'll put out very briefly. Right now, for cash donations, governments pay about 46%. For capital gains tax, we talk about listed securities. It can be typically 60%, as high as 69%. If you'd like to comment to that with their subsequent questioners about the appropriateness of that mix and whether you feel that that should be drawn more together.
And just one, who is that directed to? One person?
To Mr. McDonald.
Mr. McDonald, very briefly.
Sorry, can you just rephrase that?
The Ministry of Finance testified before us and said cash donations are covered by about 46% by government support. And listed capital gains, listed securities, it's typically 60%. So there's a definite increased subsidy right now for listed securities and capital gains donations. Do you feel that's an appropriate division or mix?
I'll be honest with you, I don't feel I'm qualified to answer that question. I mean, obviously, if there's an opportunity to have, greater recognition of the cash investments, that's fantastic. But I have to be honest with you, I'm not sure I'm qualified to throw an opinion on that one.
What I'll do is I mean, we're a minute over his time, but if any of you have any comments, please feel free to submit them to the clerk. We'll ensure all members get them. Sometimes the chair offers advice that good questions should be asked at the beginning, but anyways, I'm going to take the next round as the chair. I wanted to follow up with two organizations. I want to follow up with Cardis and so Mr. Van Pelt and Mr. Bussey, because both of you recommend not the stretch tax credit, but in fact sort of making the one-stage credit, so making it for under $200 equivalent to over $200. Now, I just want to put a critique out there that's you're probably well aware of, and that is that this will not increase giving at all, but it will simply increase the cost to the government in terms of revenues. So now this is a very public criticism. I'm sure you're both well aware of it. So I wanted you both to answer that it will not in fact increase giving or incent giving. That's the argument for the stretch tax credit, but that change will just simply increase the cost to the Treasury. Mr. Bussey?
Yeah, if I may just first, from our perspective in the church community, it is the individuals who have been supporting on a consistent basis, motivated quite often because of a religious commitment to the local church, whether they're giving tithes and offerings and those kinds of things. And from our looking at it, what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase, obviously, the funding to the charitable community. Already we know who the people are that are giving. And they have been consistent over the years. They are the ones whom we have relied on, and we've seen this over and over again. The reason why we're proposing what we're proposing is simply to allow these people to be able to have even greater capacity to be able to give more as well. Because what will happen is that because they're so dedicated to the cause of whatever charity it is that they're supporting, having the ability then to have a greater tax credit allows them to have an increased capacity.
Okay, Mr. Van Pelt.
There's some caution that needs to be employed on that on the argument that if you increasing the charitable tax credit won't increase giving. If one follows the logic of that argument too much, one might be tempted to say, let's remove the tax credit altogether. I'm rather curious what 80,000 charities would say to that. There is the matter of the law of diminishing returns that happens with charitable giving. I do not know of any research out there that illustrates that we are at the peak of the law of diminishing returns. But let's understand why we're doing the charitable tax credit increase. We are not doing it because we want to find a whole bunch of other people to be able to give. Remember, those who give are ready. There's a lot of room to give. The amount that Canadians give is not a huge amount. There's lots of potential to give more. And what we need to do, the strategy, and it's a different strategy than the stretch credit, it's to shore up this civic core that is so critical to our community, allowing us some time to answer the bigger questions. My suspicion is that the government's tax expenditure numbers are going to increasingly go down, not up. Okay, even with a benefit.
Just respectfully, though, I'm not sure I'm getting an answer to how does making it a stage 1 credit for both, how does that incent people to give more? Or does it incent people to give more? Because the argument against, and people we had in the last panel, was you're just going to increase the cost, you're not going to incent people to give more. That's why you should do the stretch tax credit, because that incents people to give more. That's an argument for the stretch. So I want you to sort of address that criticism, that this does not, in fact, incent people to give more by making it a one-stage credit. Because I frankly like the simplicity of it, but I want that argument addressed.
I would go back to your assumption about that it doesn't incent. Where do you get that assumption? If I may respectfully challenge you, Mr. Chair, on the assumption about that it doesn't incent. Every time we go
Because the argument is if I could give over $200, I'd be giving it now, and I'd be getting the higher credit. So I'm not giving that. So there's no incentive if you make it the same for me to give more than, say, the $50 I'm giving to big brothers and big sisters.
Yeah, our experience is, as we talk to charities across the country, that as the charitable tax credit goes up, people see they have more room in their disposable income to give. They're passionate about what they're going to give to, they will. There is maybe a question of leakage. If you go from 29 to 42 for every $1,000, there's $130 there that it's costing the government. Some may say, yes, there's some leakage. We'll keep 70 of it and give away the difference. I'd take the risk on that issue. I just don't see any other alternative that accomplishes your interests as well.
Okay. I got to cut myself off here in terms of time, unfortunately. But if there's anything further, please do feel free to send it in. I'll go to Mr. Bryson now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to speak to the capital gains tax exemption. Now we have for publicly listed securities, but the proposal for shares in private companies and also real estate. The Department of Financial officials told us that there was a tax expenditure they assigned to these gifts of about $34 million per year. And when pressed, the officials said that it was kind of difficult to assign that value because they admitted that it was based on the assumption that the disposition of the shares would have occurred in any case. And to understand how you assess a value to that, you have to understand the psychological impact of capital gains tax on investors. And the reality is capital gains tax actually locks up a lot of capital because people don't want to sell shares they've held on to in some cases for years and years and years, and in some cases decades. So would you agree that the actual cost to taxpayer is actually significantly less than that which Department of Financial officials are assigning rather arbitrarily today?
Anyone want to take this? Mr. Burt?
I believe Mr. Johnson was here previously and has an answer for that. I mean, Don's been the one who's really crafted this argument and would be the go-to person to help you with that if you weren't able to get the answer from his testimony.
Yeah. The issue, though, is an important one, and you've considered Mr. Julian's question, who's saying that there's a significant tax expenditure. What my point is that if you assume that the disposition of the shares or the asset would not have occurred otherwise, you could argue there's no tax expenditure because there would not have been a tax expenditure in any case, perhaps 20 years in the future when somebody, when there's someone dies and there's a pass on to an heir or something. So I think it's important to consider that. But also, the Department of Finance, when they're considering these tax expenditure arguments, doesn't really consider the leveraging that occurs in terms of the potential benefit. And I was reading yesterday in Neil Reynolds' piece in the Globe and Mail, which I think you were referring to, that I think the Federal Reserve in the U.S., one study indicated that charitable activities can be accomplished by the philanthropic sector at about a third less than what governments would have to spend to accomplish the same goal. So I think it's really important for us to consider, particularly during tight fiscal times, that these incentives actually create a leveraging effect that actually stretches tax dollars as opposed to takes tax dollars. And the Department of Finance simply does not have the mandate to look at it. Should we be, as a committee, studying more thoroughly the leveraging effect and as part of that cost-benefit analysis?
I would love to be able to help answer that question. It's interesting. This question came up in the discussions with HRSDC on their interest to increasingly leverage the social service organizations that they're part of, so that the percentages are stronger percentages based on that argument. The HRSDC internally does not have data on why and who and how these organizations actually best leverage their resources. It's a question that's still out there. I go back to my comment in my presentation. If we had no charitable tax credit at all, it didn't exist, and someone came up to you as a member of Parliament and said, "Give me $2.26 billion, and I'll influence 80,000 charities across the country, every single community, all over," you would sign on to that $2.6 billion in a minute. It would be in this budget. It is still by far the most powerful tool you have out there as a parliamentarian, and that gets partially, yeah.
Can I just following up on that? Okay, because you're getting at something that's around timing. And so, for example, at Community Foundation in southern Saskatchewan, there's a timing issue around a gift of mineral rights below the ground that may be unlocked sooner if there's an incentive to do so. But the other part of timing is, what do we need now? Like, what do the times call for? And I think this comes back to this civic participation question. How do we get actually more people right across the country providing a contribution to civic strength in all communities, and that's sort of the timeliness that I think we're after.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Go to Ms. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's good to be back at this committee. I know you'd like us to keep our questions succinct, so I will try and do that. It's a conversation that we've held at this table before. And I guess your last comment, Mr. Bird, is a great segue into my question, because it does have to do with the culture of giving. And I know I've heard that referenced a number of times around this table. And I've mentioned this before at other tables. I've heard it said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So while you're trying to create a strategy, a culture, you are also probably dealing with one that already exists. And so I think, therein lies the tension. How do you deal with a culture that's already in existence and create a new one or build on one? And I guess I'm wondering from you, or any of you, what you believe the role of the federal government would be in terms of educating the public, say through an advertising campaign. Anyone?
Mr. Bird and then Mr. Hutchinson.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting discussion that's going on right now. In fact, Alan Gregg spoke about this at the National Summit hosted by a number of us. And the point was made that in the past, most public engagement efforts have focused on attitude, awareness, understanding. And frankly, I think there's quite a high degree of awareness about the benefits of giving. But Alan Gregg made the argument that it's about shifting to strategies organized around behavior. And in fact, our message should be zeroing in on the behavioral side. And this is something economists have been grappling with ever since the downturn in 2008. People were aware of the risks, but it was the behavioral economists that understood the kinds of changes that were coming. They were the ones that predicted the downturn. So I think if the government was to pursue an advertising effort in promotion of this and get behind the tax incentives you recommend, it should be one that really zeroes in on the behavior, and through that behavior then the impact that this can have in our communities, in our environment, and the way that we participate in civic life.
Hutchinson and then Mr. Robinson.
I've answered some of the question previously, so I'll add some content. The importance of the charitable sector to the Canadian economy is significant. I don't think most Canadians are aware of that. Promoting the integration between the several sectors of our economy is key. People hear about corporations and the good and the bad they do. They hear about government. Yes, government does good and government does bad as well. They rarely hear, for example, that a number of charitable organizations bid on government contracts and the lowest bidder takes the contract and the charities seem to stretch the government's dollars, and that when the government offers the same service it costs 2, 3, sometimes 4 times as much money. I'm not suggesting the government advertise its inefficiencies, but I would suggest that promoting the idea that charities are engaging with the world and the government is engaging with charities, what are you doing, would be an incredible thing. The Canadian Christian Relief and Development Association sent over $537 million out of the country in 2010. Of that total, less than 6%, 32 million, came from CEDA. So people are engaging, and I would dare say that that $32 million was better spent than if the government had invested $32 million in having a bureaucratic civil service organization do the same work.
Okay, there's about a minute. And Mr. Robinson, you wanted to comment?
Yes, I just pick up on this because I actually don't believe that a campaign like that would have the biggest impact. I'd like to actually focus back on maybe something that Mr. Jean said, which is that when you look at how the CRA and the government looks at the financial acumen and performance of organizations, they tend to put a high value on the programs that are delivered and lower values on administration and development costs. If you wanted to really develop a culture of giving, you would allow charities to actually do much more of inculcating that culture by going out and connecting, developing deeper relationships, making a longer-term connection with the individuals who are either donating now or who could possibly donate. But all of our organizations tend to want to make sure that the bulk of our funding goes to programs simply because those are kind of the guidelines we're given. If the federal government was going to do anything to, in my mind, to look at increasing that culture, would be to look at how can we ensure that organizations can do more outreach to actually do that themselves.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 more members. If I could ask members to have short rounds, it would be helpful. But we'll go, Monsieur Maille, s'il vous plaît.
I just have one question, and then Mr. Giguère has one. So a question to Mr. Robinson. We know that it's easy for us to see which some organizations are working to help families, poor, people in poverty. In your situation, you have, the government has been attacking environmentalists. Environmentalists have been on the watch. Can you tell us, in terms of education and what you can do and how we can work with the government, how we can add in terms of where we move forward in terms of a society?
So, the question goes to kind of my opening comments, which were that I believe the government has a role to really acknowledge that charities play a significant role in policy development in this country. A long history of doing it, no matter what the sector is in. So it's difficult when, and I know there's been some pressure on the environmental sector lately, and when in effect it sort of diminishes the fact that a lot of the work that environmental organizations and charities are doing are actually to promote government policy and strengthen it in a way that impacts on all Canadians equally. So I would just hope that in the debate on the single issue that seems to be dominating the media these days, that we don't lose sight of the fact that all charities, environmental organizations included, are actually working towards the civic good of this country.
Okay. Monsieur Giguère, question très brève.
Mr. Giguère, a brief question. Very brief. I will try. Not easy in my case, as you know. what would be the charitable sector's reaction if we favored one particular group, such as homeless shelters or food banks, and allow food donors to use this as a deductible expense? It's not the case right now. Or have them have a real estate gift, for instance, have that reserved only for shelters or food banks, have vehicles, tables, equipment, or refundable tax credit for these groups. Right now, it's often religious communities that allow such institutions to have facilities.
I guess the concern would be what institution would make those judgment calls. I'm imagining in this case you would think it would be the Government of Canada. That would be a fearful thing to me.
Anyone further? Mr. McDonald?
I think the reaction wouldn't be overly popular to suggest that there's one element of the voluntary sector that is more important than others. And so if you just want an honest gut feel, I think that there would be a lot of organizations who would say, we understand and recognize the need for that service, but I'm not sure that there's anyone really, and it comes back to who gets to say that that service is more important or will do better than another service.
Okay. Mr. Hutchinson, you wanted to comment?
I have lived and worked in communities across the country where the religious community has provided space, has started the food banks and has turned them over to the community when it's appropriate and those kinds of things. I would be very concerned about favoring one sector over another, but promoting greater cooperation between the sectors might be advantageous. I also don't want us to lose sight of the fact that most people give either because their convictions have created a planned form of giving, a certain amount of their income, or they're giving out of their excess, the extra that they have, and bring us back around to the idea that there are a lot of single-income families out there who would give more if they had more disposable income.
Thank you. Mr. Bird, very briefly, please.
I want to check in with Centre pour Roulant in Montreal or with the Stop in Toronto. These are two food security-based centered organizations that have spun off a series of other things of importance to their community: youth employment, seniors care, social enterprise, youth engagement activities. And so it's that connectivity of those issues that's important at the community level, and I think they would benefit, or you would benefit from their views.
Okay, thank you. I have before I go to Ms. Glover.
Just very quickly, Mr. Chair, we've heard 3 times from 3 different witnesses about cooperation between charities, how it could encourage giving and also work to our advantage. I'm just wondering if any of the witnesses could table that to the committee at a later date. They wouldn't be prepared for that.
We can certainly have them table that. Yeah. Thank you. Merci. Go to Ms. Glover. Brief round, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I begin, I want to say to you I'm very disappointed in the comments made by Mr. Mai. In fact, the government members have been very respectful of these witnesses today. I don't recall any of them ever attacking any of the environmentalists who might be here, and I resent that, and I'm going to stand up for these members who care very much about this study that's on charities. But nevertheless, having said that, may I ask you to do some homework for me? Not a teacher, but I really want your advice on this. Mr. Paul Reed, who is a professor from Carleton University, was here, and I'm going to read to you just a segment of what was in his report, because, again, it's on bequests, but there's suggestions in here that we never seem to get to, but I would be really interested in hearing from you about these suggestions, because, as Mr. Van Pelt said, this demographic change of baby boomers is something that we're looking at. So here's what he says. Financial incentives may be worth considering for charitable donations that take the form of bequests. As baby boomers move into retirement and approach old age, Canada is on the verge of a period of historically unprecedented numbers of estates containing significant value. Then he goes on to say there may well be potential for a graduated tax credit regime that would facilitate the making of bequests, which entail capital gains to charitable organizations. So if you have a suggestion on how we might make that happen, great. And then he also suggests A further possibility that would have much the same effect as a tax credit scheme and would cost the public treasury no more than a tax credit approach would be a partial matching contribution approach, where, for example, a modest percentage, say 10 or 15% of funds is in a bequest assigned to a charitable organization would be matched by the Government of Canada. So there's two suggestions he makes, and I'm very interested in hearing from you following this, if you can send it to us. If you think this might have an impact on what we're trying to accomplish, and because we never get to it, I appreciate that you allowed me to read that out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Does there anyone want to comment briefly on that? Mr. Van Pelt?
Thank you for that. Paul Reed worked with Cardis on our Culture of Generosity study, which you may have seen, and we are about to release a study with Paul on plan giving and the nature of plan giving, and we'll tackle some of those issues. So I look forward to submitting that when it's published.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Glover. I just wanted to clarify as the chair, because there has been some issues raised, and I did ask CRA very directly this. They gave me a very direct answer. I said, is there any political direction given to you whatsoever in terms of who you audit or do not audit at CRA? And CRA said, no, there's not. There's none whatsoever. So if there is any sense from any of you that you're feeling, as Mr. Hutchinson, you spoke to this earlier just in terms of the issue, but if there's any sense that there is political direction given to CRA because of any of your public advocacy, please let this committee know, because that's what CRA has told us categorically. So if any of you have anything to refute what CRA is telling us, please let us know. You can state it now, or you can send it to me as the chair later on, but that's what CRA was very clear with us on January 31st before this committee. So I did want to point that out and clarify that. I did want to thank you very much for all of your work, as members have said. Mr. Mayo, point of order? Or?
Just a quick just a response to Ms. Glover. My comments were not made towards the member of this committee. I think you all have been very respectful. My comments were made towards the cabinet ministers of the government.
Okay, well, we started with chocolates between the members, and we finished with a little political dispute. But we want to thank you very much. Again, if you have anything further for us to consider, please do submit it to the clerk. We'll ensure all members get it. Thank you so much for being with us here today.